Tariffs. You hear that word all the time in the news, right? It's this powerful, really old tool that governments use. But when you hear that a, say, 25% tariff has been slapped on a product, what does that actually mean? And, the big question is, where does that money really come from? Let's follow the money and find out.
So here's the mystery we're going to solve today. When a country, like the US, puts a tariff on goods from another country, let's say China, who is actually paying that bill? Is it the Chinese government? Do they write a check? Or is it someone else? Does that cost, maybe, land somewhere a lot closer to home, like in your wallet?
To get to the bottom of this, we are absolutely going to follow the money. We'll start with the basics, like what a tariff even is. Then we'll look at why governments bother with them in the first place and get into the nitty-gritty of how they're calculated. After that, we'll uncover who really pays, and finally, we'll zoom out and see the wider ripple effects, like how these things can spark massive trade wars.
All right, first things first. Before we can start tracking the money, we need to know exactly what we're looking for. So, what in the world is a tariff?
Okay, at its absolute core, a tariff is just a tax. That's it. It's not some kind of fee that one country pays to another. Instead, it's a tax that's collected by the customs authority of the country that's importing the goods. So that's the first stop on our money trail. The tax gets collected right at the border. But why a country decides to collect this tax, well, that's where things get strategic.
So, why do governments even go to the trouble of taxing imports? Well, it usually comes down to a few key reasons, a few big goals they're trying to achieve. You can pretty much boil it down to four main objectives. First, the easy one, to raise money for the government. Simple enough. Second, and this is the big one you hear about all the time, is protectionism. The idea is to make imported goods more expensive so that companies at home have a better shot at competing. Third, they can act as a kind of safety net, to keep out products that don't meet a country's standards. And finally, they're a massive bargaining chip in high-stakes global politics.
Now here's the key detail. Not all tariffs are created equal. No way. The way the tax is actually calculated makes a huge difference in how much gets paid, and the method really just depends on the product.
The two most common types you'll see are called ad valorem and specific. Ad valorem is just a fancy Latin way of saying according to value. It's a straight percentage of whatever the item is worth. So the more expensive it is, the more tax you pay. A specific tariff, on the other hand, is totally different. It's a fixed fee per unit, like per kilogram or per widget. The price of the product can go up or down, but that tax amount stays exactly the same.
Let's make this real with a couple of examples you might find in the grocery store. If you're importing spinach into the US, you're going to pay an ad valorem tariff, 20% of its value. So if a kilogram of that spinach costs $3, the tax is 60 cents. Simple. But for squash, it's a specific tariff, a flat 1.5 cents for every single kilogram you bring in, no matter what the market price for squash is that day.
And believe it or not, it can get even more complicated. Sometimes governments actually mix and match, creating something called a compound tariff. Take mushrooms, for instance. An importer pays a specific tariff of 8.8 cents per kilogram, plus an ad valorem tariff of 20% of their value. It's literally a 2-for-1 tax.
Okay, so we know what tariffs are, we know why they're used, and we know how the math works. Now it's time for the main event. We're getting to the heart of it. Who actually pays for all of this? This is where the money trail finally leads us to our destination.
Okay, let's just bust a huge myth right now. There's this widespread idea that when the US puts a tariff on Chinese goods, the Chinese government or some Chinese company writes a check to the US Treasury. Let me be clear, that is absolutely not how it works. So here is the absolute most crucial point to understand. The tariff is a tax paid by a domestic company, the importer, to its very own government. So a US-based company that's bringing in goods from China pays that tax directly to US Customs. The check isn't written in Beijing, it's written in Boston or Chicago or LA. The whole transaction happens right here at home. So if the American importing company pays the tax, that's the end of the story, right? Case closed. Well, not so fast, because now that importer has a brand new business expense, and you can bet they aren't just going to eat that cost themselves. And here's the chain reaction. It's like dominoes falling. The importer turns around and passes that new tax cost on by raising the price of the products they sell. And who buys those products? Well, domestic consumers. That's you. You're the one who ultimately pays that higher price at the checkout counter. And it doesn't even stop there. With foreign goods now more expensive, guess what domestic companies can do? They can raise their prices too, since there's less competition to keep them down. The final result? That tariff, which started at the port, has now found its way into the price tag of stuff you buy every day.
And hey, you don't have to just take my word for it. A major study by the International Monetary Fund looked at the U.S.-China trade dispute, and they concluded, pretty definitively, that U.S. importers and, by extension, U.S. consumers shouldered almost the entire cost. The money didn't come from China, it came out of pockets right here at home.
You know, economists have a term for this phenomenon. It's called deadweight loss. Think of it like this. The government collects $1 in tax revenue from the tariff. Great. But because that tax made things more expensive for everyone, consumers and businesses together actually lost more than $1 in value. Maybe because the sale never happened, or someone couldn't afford a product they needed. It's kind of like an economic own goal, where the total damage to the economy is actually bigger than the government's gain.
So beyond the direct hit to your wallet, tariffs create these massive waves that spread throughout the entire economy, and even across the globe. Let's zoom out and look at some of those broader consequences.
One of the biggest ripple effects is retaliation. This timeline of the U.S.-China trade war is a textbook example of a tit-for-tat. The U.S. hits China with tariffs on steel, and boom, China immediately hits back with tariffs on American farm products. This escalation, from steel back in 2018 all the way to 100% tariffs on electric vehicles in 2024, can quickly spiral out of control, creating huge uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the ocean.
And all of this leads to a really fierce debate. On one side, you have proponents who argue that, hey, these tariffs are a necessary tool to protect jobs at home and to punish countries with unfair trade practices. They see it as leveling the playing field. But on the flip side, critics argue that these policies just backfire, leading to higher prices for everyone, slowing down the whole economy, and really damaging important international relationships.
So we end up right back where we started, but now hopefully with a much clearer picture. Are tariffs a protective shield for a nation's industries? Or are they really just a hidden tax that all of us end up paying for? Well, the next time you hear that word in the news, you'll know exactly where to follow the money.